The severe earthquake in Morocco has brought immense human suffering to the population, with thousands dead and even more injured. And it's also set to take a tough economic toll. The region worst affected by the quake has seen infrastructure destroyed and livelihoods have been put on the line.
Apples from their own trees. For many people in the small village of Anougal in the Moroccan province of Al Haouz, the fruit is an important source of income. But the severe earthquake has caused devastating destruction in this area. Houses in the village have collapsed, and it's unlikely that there will be any income from apple harvesting this year.
Agriculture was seriously affected. We work hard to earn a little money by planting apple trees to prepare for the start of the school year, but now all the apples fell because of the earthquake.
Rebuilding homes and livelihoods is likely to be an overwhelming task for most people in rural Morocco.
The sector most affected by the quake is irrigation. Almost all pipes were destroyed. Additionally, our harvest of apples and walnuts fell due to the quake. We have never experienced such a devastating quake before.
Fortunately, rescue teams are able to reach more and more remote areas, and there are initial aid deliveries of food and tents.
Well, let's further discuss the economic impact of that devastating earthquake in Morocco with Max Scalene. He's a political scientist at the Institute of Development Studies in London. Thanks a lot for being with us. I mean, the human cost is clearly immeasurable, but what sort of economic damage has the quake done to the areas affected?
I think you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to think right now further than the enormous human costs. And obviously, I think our thoughts are with the people who've lost family members in this horrific event. But I think over the coming weeks and months, we're going to think and hear a lot more about the longer term economic consequences for the region. The area that's been most affected is traditionally quite largely reliant on both agriculture and tourism. There are these mountainous regions around Marrakesh, which obviously itself is a touristic hotspot. And both of these industries are likely going to be affected quite substantially and for quite some time. They're also dependent on infrastructure and roads into the mountains. All of the condition of all of those in the coming weeks and months is unclear. But I think the most damaging impact economically is going to be on the people and communities in these areas. If we think about livelihoods in these areas, a lot of people tend to own their own houses. It's a really central asset for people. Their income's often not that large, but people have a place to live in that they don't pay rent in. And the fact that a lot of these houses, a lot of these assets, a lot of this infrastructure has been destroyed is going to be a really, really brutal hit on livelihoods, especially amongst those who have lower incomes in these communities. And it will take a very, very long time for people to recover.
Yeah, how well positioned is Morocco to rebuild, particularly the infrastructure that you've talked about?
I think there certainly efforts are being made, and Morocco has taken some international aid as well. But I think it's a substantive undertaking that will take a lot of time. And it's also for a region that historically has often seen itself as being marginalized, has often seen itself as not having seen enough invested in it. So that on top of these dynamics, you now have this further deterioration, really means that there's a lot of work to be done. And that is, I think, both work for Morocco, but also hopefully for international assistance.
And the World Bank thinks that the earthquake could knock some 8% off Morocco's GDP, which is the equivalent of like $10.7 billion. It's a huge amount of money. How is Morocco going to be able to cope with that kind of hit to its GDP?
I'm always extremely cautious with GDP estimations like that come so quickly after a tragedy like this. I think it's extremely difficult to put numbers on these kind of things, though the World Bank is going to be able to at least partially verify some of this themselves because they have their annual meeting in Marrakesh in just a couple of weeks. I think the impact of this will be heterogeneously distributed. And I think that is a key thing to keep in mind. It is, yes, it has a national impact. Yes, it'll have an impact on the national GDP, but it'll particularly have an impact on the people in the regions where it is, where these things have happened. So I think scanning to the national picture that quickly is distorting the impact quite a bit. The effect is very focused and very concentrated. So yes, it might shave off a couple of points of GDP nationally, but it'll be a lot more than that in these villages and towns that have been most affected.
And given what you just said, it seems almost silly to talk about going even further and and talking about internationally the impact this could have. But if Morocco does take an economic hit, and Moroccans have lower spending power, and there's disruption to supply chains within Morocco, I mean, how interlocked is Morocco with its neighbours, and how could the impact of that spread to other countries?
I mean, Morocco has, for the last couple of decades, really, tried to position itself more and more as an economic hub in the region, as a gateway to trade with Africa more broadly. If you look at, for example, Royal Air Maroc, the national airline, its connections to the rest of West Africa, but also to Europe, have expanded quite strategically. So it's tried to position itself as this wider strategic hub, and obviously, consequently, impacts on Morocco will be felt throughout the region. But I think it's too early to put a finer spin on that. And maybe it's worth, if we're thinking about the region more broadly, to also keep in mind that there's been a terrible natural disaster in Libya in the past week as well. And to keep in mind that the region more broadly is also very vulnerable to the environmental consequences of climate change. This earthquake might not be an instance of that, but I think more broadly, that's a vulnerability that is not just limited to Morocco, but the region more broadly, and that a lot more support and help is needed to make sure that that is not something we talk a lot more about in the coming years.
Indeed. Of course, the immediate reaction, as you say, is to get the people in the affected areas back on their feet. But Max Galline from the Institute for Development Studies, thank you very much for talking us through the wider impact as well.
Thank you very much.